Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Battle for Bright Moon, an episode of She-Ra, Princess of Power, produced by Filmation Studios. So here we are with the 5th episode of She-Ra. Even to this day, people seem to be confused by the order of things, thus I'll repeat what I stated in my episode commentaries for Into Etheria, Beast Island, She-Ra Unchained and Reunions, and start off by summarising the production. The first 5 episodes of She-Ra were produced as Into Etheria, Beast Island, She-Ra Unchained, Reunions and Battle for Bright Moon, collectively known as The Sword of She-Ra, parts 1 to 5. After production was completed, Filmation decided to edit together the first 5 episodes of She-Ra, trimming the content for time, and releasing it as a movie in theatres titled The Secret of the Sword, to better showcase the introduction of She-Ra and capitalise on the huge success of Masters of the Universe. It's funny thinking about this introduction sequence. I mean, it is pretty much a carbon copy of He-Man's, but it works. I also love that Lou Scheimer's name appears just before the final title. This episode was storyboarded by Tom Cito. At some point I'll have to showcase his storyboards not only just for this episode, but in general, because they're awesome, action-packed, and hilarious at times. I don't believe I've mentioned this, but the recaps were actually storyboarded, and in 1 or 2 cases they were storyboarded before the episodes they referred to had actually been storyboarded themselves. This kind of explains why there are some differences in the staging and visuals. My goodness, I just love seeing Hordak stood inside Snake Mountain. It's such a shame this didn't happen a lot more in the series. The Sword of She-Ra really did keep a lot of moments for itself, didn't it? It's a shame the recap didn't show the pair of villains laughing. That would have set the stage even better. Here we are in the final episode of The Sword of She-Ra, Battle for Bright Moon. This opening scene in which the royal family, now reunited, talk about Orko and Madame Raz is a nice little scene, mainly for the fact that it answers the question, where is Orko during all of this? Something that I do recall many people asking of the theatrical release, myself included, as this scene was removed for time. Oddly, the only issue I have with this scene is that Adora talks about Madame Raz bungling a spell, and yet Adora surely hasn't been around Raz long enough to witness a spell go wrong, or maybe I'm wrong. And it is funny to think that in He-Man's big screen adventure, one of the most prominent characters in the series, Orko, does not even show up. In reality, Larry DiTillio believed that including Orko would be a little too much for the story, and it allowed him to plan and eventually pen an episode in which Orko and She-Ra meet. And meet they do in the memorable Season 1 episode, A Talent for Trouble. On the surface, this episode seems rather shallow. The villains plan to kidnap Adora, the heroes must rescue her, and the Etherians must take back the Kingdom of Bright Moon. However, the episode contains a great deal of hidden meaning. This episode feels like one of the longest in the series because so much happens, and it should come as no surprise that out of the first 5 episodes that this saga is comprised of, this is the least edited when a part of the Secret of the Sword movie. There is the whole ordeal with Skeletor, then Adora returns to Etheria, then the rebels fight for Bright Moon, and throughout the entire story there are enough tears and goodbyes to use up 20 boxes of Kleenex. Other brands are available. Larry DiTillio wrote so many tearful moments in this episode that he actually acknowledged it in the script by stating, "Boy, this show will float away if we're not careful." It's great to see Chef Alan appear once more, even if it is Skeletor in disguise. There's still a part of me that believes that Chef Alan is really Horde Prime. Yeah, wishful thinking, I know. It's scary how easy it is for the evil warriors and Hordak to enter the royal palace on occasion. It could be argued, and I'd like to think that this is the case, that the heroes all have their guard down due to the unexpected return of Adora. With so much joy in their hearts, the idea of pure evil just around the corner must seem a lifetime away at this point. I've mentioned before during this saga that the music was re-edited and in some cases recomposed for the theatrical release of The Secret of the Sword. What I have yet to mention is that some of the music was changed. Shockingly, in the upcoming scene in which Queen Marlena has lost Adora and is weeping uncontrollably, this episodic version, as you're about to hear, plays an Orko-like theme under the drama and sadness. It's incredibly jarring. Just listen.
Assemble my soldiers. We'll level Snake Mountain if need be.
You'll notice that the music just doesn't quite work with the emotion of the scene. It's one of the very few times in the entire 223 episodes of He-Man and She-Ra that a musical cue feels inappropriate. However, the Secret of the Sword version plays a wonderfully emotional piece of music that perfectly complements the story and mood of the scene. The music, it doesn't even go with the voice acting here. If you can, after listening to this commentary, seek out the same scene in The Secret of the Sword and listen to how much better it sounds.
Then let's move!
Hey! Wait for me!
When you think about it, the villains have actually successfully repeated the very tragedy they committed 20 years ago. They kidnapped the Princess of Eternia. Many of the same things happen all over again. Hordak carries Adora away, Man-at-Arms tries to stop him and Skeletor, the villains retreat to Snake Mountain, the King and Queen are devastated, Man-at-Arms organises a rescue party, and Hordak plans to take Adora to Etheria. Few viewers realise that this actually gives us a rare opportunity to see how that crime of 20 years ago affected the characters. King Randall reacts with anger and vengeance, Queen Marlena with grief and distress. They probably felt the same way when Hordak did this the first time. Man-at-Arms provides the voice of reason and calmness. This repeat performance also allows us to see how much things have changed in 20 years. Teela helps Man-at-Arms pursue Hordak. Skeletor has become more devious and betrays his old teacher before Hordak can double-cross him. And the biggest important difference is the presence of the most powerful man in the universe, He-Man, who is the obvious solution to the family's problem.
She's fainted.
Just like a woman.
The story now shifts focus back to Adora and She-Ra. A lot of the material that makes this episode a favourite was edited out of The Secret of the Sword. As the editing department saw that the 2-hour film needed to reach a conclusion quicker, they foolishly chose to eliminate some of the emotional and well-written pieces of dialogue from Battle for Bright Moon. Of course, the editors never cut any of the action sequences, but all of the meaningful scenes were ripe for butchering. Besides the opening dinner table discussion, other edited scenes include a tearful exchange between Adora and the Sorceress, and parts of Adora's speech to her parents about leaving. Thankfully, we get to witness those exchanges in this very episode.
Bye now!
Where are we going?
To the lab. Skeletor wants us to run some tests on this sword the princess was carrying.
What for?
Hordak seems to think there was something special about it.
This conversation between Trapjaw and Triclops is noteworthy, as it is the very last time we'll hear the villains discuss the fact that there is something special about the Sword of Protection. It's such a shame it was never followed up. Placing Adora inside Snake Mountain here allows Larry to prove that this woman is just as smart and strong as He-Man, and maybe even a bit more entertaining at times. Simply put, Larry DiTillio does a brilliant job of initiating He-Man's female counterpart into his male-dominated world. It gives credence to She-Ra's claim of equality with her brother. One could argue that Adora is far too confident to be effortlessly sneaking around Snake Mountain, but the truth is, she is a former Force Captain of the Horde, so she would have had a great deal of training when it comes to strategy. One thing about the Adora to She-Ra transformation sequence in the first 5 episodes, during the sequence which shows Adora in front of Castle Grayskull, in this version the drawbridge is missing. The fact that this slipped through clearly didn't sit well with Filmation, and they reshot the transformation sequence to be used in episode 6 onwards. To say this would have been time consuming and expensive would be an understatement. Going back to the cast for this episode, more regulars appear in this single half hour than any other. At least 25 familiar faces show up. This is one of the reasons this episode is so likeable. The sheer number of villains is daunting. Skeletor, Hordak, Shadow Weaver, Cobra Khan, Webstor, Beastman, Trapjaw and Triclops. The only one that seems to be missing from the Evil Warriors is Evil Lyn. There is a reason for this. In this episode, Larry DiTillio appears to enjoy injecting the feminine presence of She-Ra into this male-dominated series. When Adora faints and Skeletor cackles, "just like a woman," Skeletor's remark is incredibly ignorant and stereotypical. He acts as if this is the first woman that's been present in Snake Mountain, and I think Evil Lyn's presence would have negated this playful exercise in contrast, if that makes sense. And we're about to see why this story always makes me smile. When He-Man appeared to the King and Queen, we all assumed this would be yet another rescue mission. But here we are, He-Man and his allies, slowly realising that they could have just stayed at home at the Royal Palace. And of course, Skeletor ends Act 1 with one of the most memorable lines of the entire series.
Neither do I. A female He-Man. Oh, this is the worst day of my life.
Act 2 begins with the Princess of Eternia telling her parents she must return to Etheria. The frustrating thing about this is that we crave so many more conversations. They have obviously explained Marlena's Earthling origins to Adora, but there are so many things Adora should know. The story of her grandfather, King Nero, embarrassing tales from Adam's childhood, and explanations about Skeletor and Castle Grayskull. One wonders how much she actually got out of her discussions with her biological family.
We're not afraid of the Horde, and we'll protect you.
If you simply watch The Secret of the Sword, you get the impression that Adora never intended to stay on Eternia and that she always planned to return to the Rebels. The dialogue in Battle for Brightmoon dispels that myth. Upon Adora's announcement of her departure, King Randall remarks that Adora's decision to leave is Hordak's fault. Adora coolly replies that in a way it is, and that if Hordak were ever to come after her again, he may harm one of them, and she could not live with that. This is a very powerful message. Adora has found her true family, but fears her presence will endanger them. Adora is feeling what Adam feels all the time. He must live, knowing that at any moment his enemies could attack his family. This reality is too harsh for Adora, who is just getting to know her parents for the first time.
Remember, Adora, whenever you wish to return, just hold up the sword and call my name.
I'll remember. And thank you, sorceress. You've given me the happiest moments I've ever had in my life, and a destiny worth fulfilling. I'll always be grateful for that.
And at Castle Grayskull, goodbyes abound as Adora returns to Etheria. Sadly, The Secret of the Sword greatly trims this farewell, so we don't get to hear Adora's beautiful words to the sorceress, or even see the sorceress shed a tear. The saga of the long-lost princess has been a chronic ordeal for the sorceress. She hopes that Adora's victorious return does not mean they have to lose her all over again. This scene resonates throughout the viewer. We all wish that the She-Ra series had given more opportunity for interaction between Adora and the sorceress. Also, Adora certainly should have appeared on Eternia more often. Adora leaves Eternia because she believes Hordak will not let her live in peace. It is a startling realization that attests to the evilness of the Horde leader. He has controlled Adora's life since she was an infant, and he continues to control her destiny now.
By the power of Grayskull!
And just when we think the adventure is over, Prince Adam and Cringer are back on Etheria, and within seconds we get one of the most striking moments in the series when Adam and Adora transform at the same time, leading to a minute of wonderful music, superb effects, and the collective quivering of our bottom lips as nearly 4 decades later we sing along and shout along to
I am She-Ra!
Truly a momentous moment in this opening saga of the Twins of Power. Just wonderful. Briefly going back to Adora and her connection to Eternia, there was a brief period of time when Adora really did consider living on Eternia. I really do wish this time had been explored deeper. We really should have been able to watch Adora adjusting to the life of a princess, witness her predictable first clash with Teela, and see her discover the home planet she has never known. It would have been great fun to experience with Adora this time of new discoveries, her situation like that of an adopted child who has suddenly found her biological parents and realises her roots. A great emotional chapter in this story was skipped over for the sake of timeliness and action, which I understand. I think the frustrating thing about Reunions and Battle for Brightmoon is that the first half of Reunions, He-Man and She-Ra free Angela, then go to Eternia in the second act. Act 1 of Battle for Brightmoon is an adventure on Eternia, then they return to Etheria to win back Angela's castle in Act 2. Both of the major acts that take place on Etheria in these episodes seem strained and a little slow in places. The Sword of She-Ra saga flows along beautifully until Angela has to be freed and Brightmoon has to be released from the Horde rule. It may have been better to structure the story so reunions had taken place entirely on Eternia, so that Battle for Brightmoon could be completely focused on rescuing Queen Angela and Brightmoon in Etheria. Splicing the Eternia and Etheria action the way this story does only makes the Etheria segments suffer and appear laboured at times. Nonetheless, Angela's freedom and the rebels' victory over the Horde serve as great platforms for the emerging rebellion. Nay, Great Rebellion. It's funny that this saga actually wraps up rather quickly. We have had an epic, emotionally charged first 4 episodes and the first act of the 5th, and yet the last 5 or so minutes seem superfluous to this 5-part tale. That said, this is the true beginning of Etheria's first successful rebellion against the Horde. The battle for Brightmoon is actually a turning point in Eternia's history, and is even referenced in future episodes as the Horde's invincibility is proven to be weak. The rather striking pan showing all of the rebellion ready to take back Castle Brightmoon is fantastic, but there is actually an error. The background is the night version of the Whispering Woods. Thankfully, this was actually corrected for the Secret of the Sword, one of the few things the theatrical release really did get right. The battle sequence itself seems rather typical, but the scene changes at a steady pace to create an atmosphere of action. One of the most jarring scenes in the episode is one that we have just seen, where the rebels are planning their attack and a group of wild animals suddenly intrude. This sequence is unnecessary, but it does serve its primary function of revealing She-Ra's telepathic ability to communicate with animals. We also soon see She-Ra's ability to heal animals with her hands. The only power that is not demonstrated in the Sword of She-Ra is She-Ra's ability to transform her sword into other objects. This is crazy when you think about it, given how many sword transformations occurred in the series. These powers all give She-Ra an added strength to which He-Man seems out of touch. She operates on a more personal level, understanding pain and suffering and nature in a way that He-Man simply cannot. It reflects how different their worlds are. Adam lives in a palace and defends the happy Eternians. Adora lives in a forest and fights for the poor and the oppressed Etherians. Whether or not these additional powers truly made an impact on viewer demographics is questionable. She-Ra did not employ her more feminine powers very often in the series, except for the famous sword-changing ability, and girls did not seem to have any extraordinary reactions to these powers. I happen to think girls actually prefer watching a heroine do what He-Man has always been able to do. She-Ra proves to young girls how strong and tough a woman can be, and isn't that the whole point? I mentioned that this isn't one of Filmation's more impressive looking battles, but there are plenty of good moments in it. The cutbacks to a disbelieving Hordak as his forces are slowly driven from the castle is wonderful, and we get to see that the rebels of all shapes and sizes can make a difference in this mighty confrontation. Filmation always loved to toy with the balance of magic and science. Nowhere is this more evident than in She-Ra, with the rebels relying on the magic of the Whispering Woods to protect them from the twisted science of the evil Horde. One of the things that Filmation nailed was the look of Etheria. Very different to Eternia in so many ways. The pastels and lush colours, as well as the shapes and inviting aspect of the Whispering Woods, work perfectly. Contrast that with the grim, foreboding, hellish look of the Fright Zone. It's interesting to see in a few episodes when the rebels are near the border between the woods and the Fright Zone, and we can clearly see the polluted sky creeping into the glorious green skies over Etheria. Not to go on too much of a tangent here, but one thing that bothers me as the series progresses is that it stops feeling like the rebels are oppressed. Whilst we do see numerous occasions of the Horde invading and in some cases destroying entire villages, we never feel like the Horde continue to expand their rule. It's as if they took over a vast chunk of the planet and then stopped. What's odd about this final battle, and somewhat disappointing, is that the main players, Bo, Glimmer and Angela, really don't get enough screen time. This would have been the perfect opportunity for the rebels to show the audience what they could do on the biggest stage of all. Thinking about it, it would have been so great to see Bo firing his arrows at numerous Horde troopers, Glimmer using her light magic to temporarily blind her foes, and what about Queen Angela manoeuvring across the skies of Etheria, causing Batmechs to crash into one another? Just something for these wonderfully designed characters to do. Sadly, we see them do very little in this famous battle.
No! It's not true!
We're now inside Castle Brightmoon, which looks a great deal like the Fright Zone. This indicates to me that the artists had not yet created a vision for the interior of Brightmoon, regardless of Horde decor. Hordak's confrontation with She-Ra elicits one of the great quotes.
One battle does not win a war, She-Ra.
One battle does not win a war, She-Ra. This statement promises the Princess of Power a life of hardship and constant struggle, to which her brother He-Man is a stranger.
They'll be back, and I'll be waiting.
And here we are, the final scene of The Sword of She-Ra, Battle for Brightmoon, The Secret of the Sword, whatever you want to call it. The movie version would frustratingly omit some lines of dialogue from the final exchange between He-Man and She-Ra. I say frustratingly because a few lines removed really do hint at this being the Twins of Power's destiny from the very beginning. As He-Man and She-Ra watch the festivities from afar, the exchange between them paints She-Ra as a tragic character. Hordak has once again dashed her hopes of a life on Eternia. She is raised by the Horde, then she finally discovers her true family, and now she has to leave that family to defend a planet of friends against the forces that raised her. There is so much psychological stress in She-Ra's mind that it is daunting. She can never be truly happy.
I understand. And in a way, I feel maybe things were meant to happen like this. Me becoming He-Man to protect Eternia. You becoming She-Ra to do the same on Etheria.
Yes, I feel that too. I only wish it made things easier. Tell Mother and Father I love them.
I will.
She-Ra and He-Man come to terms with their separate paths. For the first time, they acknowledge that this is their destiny. The founders of Castle Grayskull knew that these twins would serve the side of good in this way, and He-Man and She-Ra have finally accepted that.
Up, swift wind!
Farewell, She-Ra, Princess of Power!
Farewell, He-Man, dear brother!
And so, with those words, the saga of She-Ra begins. Whilst the overall story does have some minor flaws here and there, the late, great Larry DiTillio, with help from Bob Ford, placed a wealth of action, adventure, comedy, drama and characterizations into this introductory story for She-Ra. It's impossible to imagine the Princess of Power without the secret of the sword. We suspect that He-Man will be back on Etheria, but as the closing scene suggests, this is She-Ra's show now, and she's more than capable of carrying the torch. And that's the end of this commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.